The long and eventful life of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has drawn to a close at the age of 99. He was by some distance the longest-serving royal consort in British history, a role that he'd made very much his own.
There was no precedent, but if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
From the day of his marriage to the future Queen and throughout her long reign, he was at her side, in good times and bad.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
We'll take a look at the Duke's influence as a father, a grandfather and great-grandfather over several decades.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
We'll mark the success of the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme for young people, just one of the achievements being praised by political leaders today.
Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life.
And we'll reflect on his 70 years of public service and the hundreds of charities and causes that he embraced. Good evening. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving royal consort in British history, a man of strong views and a strong sense of duty, has died at the age of 99. Since the announcement by Buckingham Palace at midday, there's been a stream of tributes recognising his decades of public service and his constant support for the Queen during her long reign. The statement from the Palace was brief. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. Prince Philip, at the Queen's side for over 70 years, has played a prominent role in public life here in the United Kingdom and in the Commonwealth. And tributes have come from around the world, led in Britain by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We will have the story for you of the Duke's remarkable life, all the causes that he backed, all the interesting features about his thinking and his modernising instincts. All of that is to come. But before that, a word with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, because we'll come to those themes, Nick, but it's surely the right time to pause for a moment and think about Her Majesty the Queen, who's lost her husband of 73 years.
Yes, an immense loss for her. They were absolutely devoted to each other across 7 decades and more of their marriage. Different in temperament, but united in their commitment to duty and service. And he came so very close to that 100th birthday milestone that he wanted to achieve, 8 weeks and 6 days away. But we saw how very frail he was when he left hospital on the 16th of March to return to Windsor. His death, therefore, cannot be considered a surprise, but it is a moment of great sadness, of course, for the family and in particular for the Queen. Hers is a lonely role as it is as head of state. The one person who has been there in her support always has been her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. Her path will be a more solitary one now, though she will have her faith and her family to support her. The Prince of Wales, I understand, drove across from Highgrove to Windsor to see his mother this afternoon. And she will have so many memories of 73 years as husband and wife, of nearly 70 years as monarch and consort. People who know them say that, he has been the unsung hero of this reign. He's made an incalculable and, in some ways, unrecognised contribution to its success and its stability. As one person who's known them for many years put it, she could not have done it without him. And, we recall what she has said about him. At the time of the Diamond Jubilee, she described him as my constant strength and guide. Let's just consider those words carefully. She's very particular about the language she uses. My constant strength and guide. That's what he was to her, year after year, decade after decade.
Nick, thank you, and we'll join you once again a little later in the programme. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent. You're watching this extended edition of BBC News at 10. We'll be marking this significant milestone in British public life by reporting on today's tributes and all the reaction, by looking at the areas in which the Duke was most influential, the legacy he leaves. But we'll start with this account of the Duke's eventful and sometimes turbulent life, and this is Nicholas Witchell's report.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At
of
the
God.
Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die,
And so,
against all manner of
rising,
things, so help me God.
touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip.
I, Philip.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
To my wedded wife.
To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?
80.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
Believe it.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memory is going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings. yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. The last sight of him was last month, leaving hospital in London after a month-long stay. He'd undergone treatment for an unspecified heart condition and he looked frail. While he'd been in hospital, the Queen had had to deal with the aftermath of the Sussexes' US television interview without her husband at her side. Tonight, his two eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
Princess Anne spoke of the support he'd given to the Queen.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
The words of Her Majesty the Queen ending that report on the story of Philip's life by our correspondent Nicholas Witchell. Well, flags are flying at half-mast on government and royal buildings, including, of course, Buckingham Palace. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Sarah Campbell, who's there. But first, let's join our correspondent Helena Wilkinson at Windsor Castle. And Helena, you've been there all day. What would you say about the atmosphere there?
Well, Huw, this royal town has seen many royal events over the years, both sad and happy ones. Today, I think it's been one of quiet reflection here in Windsor, and understandably a sombre mood here as the news spread through this town that the Duke of Edinburgh had died. Many people came here to the castle. Some laid flowers, some paused, shared memories, reflected on the Duke's remarkable life. We spoke to a young boy called Oscar who came with his mother, and he left a card. On that card he wrote, "Your Majesty, so sorry about hearing about your amazing husband." Another lady we spoke to said, "It's so sad, I just wanted him to get to 100. Of course, the Duke was a couple of months away from his 100th birthday, but the Duke spent his last days here at Windsor Castle. After being discharged from hospital 3 weeks ago, he and the Queen spent the last year here isolating together. They quietly celebrated the Duke's 99th birthday last year, and they also quietly celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary. Tonight here, Huw, at the castle behind us, the Queen, now a widow, is in mourning for her husband, a husband who was by her side for so many years.
Helena, thank you. That's Helena for us there at Windsor. Let's go from Windsor to central London, talk to our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, who's at Buckingham Palace. Sarah, we are, of course, at a very difficult period in terms of public health with all of these restrictions. And one can assume then that, you know, the kinds of crowds that we might have expected at the gates today clearly are not there. And, of course, it'll affect as well the way the palace is planning the next few days.
Well, that's right, Huw. I mean, the deaths of many thousands of people over the past year haven't been marked in a way that their friends and their families would have liked due to the pandemic, and Prince Philip's will be no different. The notice of his death, in line with tradition, was brought out to the railings at Buckingham Palace on an easel, but it didn't stay there. It was taken down after an hour for fear of attracting crowds. And as you say, people have been coming here all afternoon. They've been coming to lay flowers, to write messages, or simply just to spend some time here at what was, of course, the Duke's London home. And in small numbers, they do continue to come this evening. But going forward, the advice really is that due to COVID, people are being asked not to gather at royal residences. They're being asked to donate to charity rather than to bring flowers. And in terms of writing their messages of thanks to the Duke for his years of public service and messages of support for the Queen at this difficult time, they're being asked to write them at the online Book of Condolence, which is now live on the royal website. Going forward, the arrangements for the Duke's funeral are being finalised at the moment and will be made public as soon as they have been approved by the Queen.
Sarah, once again, many thanks. Sarah Campbell there for us, our royal correspondent at Buckingham Palace tonight. Well, politicians will deliver their own tributes when Parliament is recalled at Westminster on Monday. All campaigning for May's elections has been suspended. The government is asking people not to gather or to leave flowers at royal residences, as Sarah was telling us there, because of these current restrictions, and indeed to minimise travel. Our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph reports now on the reaction to the news of the death.
The Union flag at half-mast above the palace where he'd spent so much of his working life, and placed on the gates the official announcement of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. For the royal family, this is a deeply personal loss. Earlier today, the Prince of Wales left his home in Gloucestershire to visit his mother at Windsor Castle.
It is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and, in recent years, great-grandfather.
His presence and significance in British national life recognised in the tributes.
The UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country, and above all, I think he'll be remembered for his support and devotion to the Queen.
Memories of an extraordinary man, a note amongst the flowers left at Windsor, where he died this morning. But the remembrance has gone way beyond this royal town.
On behalf of the Welsh Government and people in all parts of Wales, I offer our deepest condolences to Her Majesty the Queen, Her Majesty's children and their families.
It is with deep sadness that I have learned of the death of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. It is a sadness that I know will be shared by countless others in Northern Ireland and right across the world.
When any family loses a loved one, it's really difficult, and whilst they may be public figures, they are also a family that are hurting, so I just wanted to extend my condolences to them.
At the Queen's official residence in Scotland, the formal announcement and personal memories.
He had a close association, of course, with Scotland. He went to school in Scotland. I know that he enjoyed all of the time he spent at Balmoral. He had a very long association as Chancellor with the University of Edinburgh.
At Westminster Abbey this evening and elsewhere around the UK, the bells were rung 99 times as a mark of respect for the Duke's 99 years.
Prince Philip sums up a life lived well and ended well. And I would say across the nation we can look at this life, feel a deep sense of pride, a deep sense of admiration and gratitude.
The royal family will grieve privately for now, although tonight on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's charity website, a message that thanks the Duke of Edinburgh for his service, saying he'll be greatly missed. Across the UK, the Duke remained a memorable public figure.
99 years old, a very good age to get to. Shame we didn't get to his 100th birthday.
Just say a few little things that he shouldn't do, which that's what I like as well.
He's human.
You know.
like we all are again. It's back to that, you know, being human, isn't it?
He's just been a wonderful man, and their love has been plain for everybody to see. So, really, sincerest condolences to the Queen.
At Buckingham Palace this evening, at the end of a day of great sadness for many, a steady stream of people came to pay their respects to a man who held a unique place in public life.
Some of today's reaction there, and that was Daniela Ralph reporting. We saw a little earlier that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, had made his own statement in Downing Street, not long after the announcement at midday today. And of course, MPs will be going to Westminster on Monday for their own session to pay tribute. Let's talk to Laura Kuensberg, our political editor in Downing Street. What can we expect then, Laura?
Well, normal politics, Huw, is on pause for now, and the showing of respect and tributes is in its place, not just from the Prime Minister at the lectern here in Downing Street today, not just at a cabinet meeting this afternoon when heartfelt tributes were paid, but on Monday in the House of Commons, MPs will give their public respects for as long perhaps as 6 or 7 hours. But perhaps more crucially, a very important set of elections are underway right now in Scotland, Wales and in parts of England, and campaigning in those ballots is suspended for now. And I think partly we're seeing what you might expect, a formal showing of respect for someone who's been part of this country's fabric for such a long time. But there's one thing that has been agreed on by politicians from right across the public spectrum that has been crystal clear. Because one of the curiosities of our unwritten constitution is that the husband or wife of a monarch doesn't have a specific role. But by being by the Queen's side for such a long time, as such a stalwart supporter, by extension, politicians have all acknowledged that Prince Philip did such a huge service to the country as a whole. And we've seen that time and time again from politicians from every single party who, as soon as the news emerged, were really lining up to give their own tributes. And just the length of his life is one thing that's also been commented on so much in Westminster today. Prince Philip was born when Lloyd George was Prime Minister, and through his life saw the administrations of 20 different Prime Ministers. His adult life, of course, spent in public service. And the longevity of service, that permanence of the monarchy, a contrast perhaps tonight to so much of the thrash of modern day politics, a business in the 2020s that tonight at least is on hold.
Laura, many thanks again. Laura Kuensberg with her thoughts there for us in Downing Street. Well, Prince Philip pledged at his marriage back in 1947 to give lifelong support to his wife. And after she ascended the throne in 1952, he was a permanent presence at her side. His sense of duty and service has been mentioned in many of today's tributes, as we've heard, including from President Biden, who offered his condolences and said that the Duke's legacy would live on through all the charitable endeavours that he had shaped. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports now on reaction around the world to the Duke's death.
And first to greet His Royal Highness was the Governor, Sir Maurice Dorman.
For more than 70 years, the Duke of Edinburgh crisscrossed the world, sometimes at the Queen's side, sometimes on his own, leaving an international legacy that was reflected in the global tributes paid today.
And now breaking news from the UK, the royal family has issued a statement.
From NBC. Across the world, his death made the headlines. From a White House the Duke knew so well, the current incumbent sent his deepest condolences.
Prince Philip, he was a heck of a guy. He, it was his lifetime of service to the United Kingdom and the whole Commonwealth. I think he's going to be missed, particularly in the United Kingdom. But 99 years old, he never slowed down at all, and which I admire the devil out of.
And it was to the Commonwealth that the Duke travelled so often, renewing friendships with countries with historic ties to Britain, including those like Canada, which still held the Queen as head of state.
Prince Philip was a man of service, motivated by a sense of duty to others. I know that through the Duke of Edinburgh's award, he helped empower millions of young people.
At times, the Duke represented the Queen overseas, as countries marked their move from empire to independence and then Commonwealth.
You should have seen His Royal Highness at the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It was extraordinary. He was the heart and the soul, and I think he will be greatly missed. He brought spice and excitement wherever he went, and I don't think we'll see the like of him again.
The Duke had a global perspective.
All the places and the people that you've seen, they all belong to this one family of nations of ours.
Presenting television programmes about his travels, but also representing Britain at memorials for a world war in which he played an active part. Chancellor Merkel said his friendship with Germany would not be forgotten. President Macron of France said he lived an exemplary life defined by bravery and duty. Greek-born, of Danish blood, the Duke was an elder statesman of European royalty. The Spanish king, here on the left, and his wife sent a telegram to the Queen. "Dear Aunt Lilibet, we are deeply saddened to hear about the passing away of dear Uncle Philip." One place, of course, where the Duke may be especially missed is the island of Tanna in the southwest Pacific, where he was worshipped by some as a god.
James Landale there with some of the world reaction today. We've already heard, of course, from the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, but let's talk a little more about reaction in those nations. Let's join my colleague Alan Little, first of all, who's in Edinburgh for us. And I'm just wondering, Alan, given the links between the Duke and Edinburgh itself, and of course Balmoral, as the First Minister mentioned earlier, tell us a little more about the sense of the way that this news has been received.
Well, the line rampant, as you'd expect, is flying at half-mast here above Holyrood House. Huw, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said she sent her personal and deepest condolences to the Queen and those of the entire Scottish people. The other party leaders echo those sentiments, of course, and said they agreed to suspend campaigning for the Scottish parliamentary elections next month. The moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland said that the Duke of Edinburgh had demonstrated throughout his life that privilege ought to be linked, as he put it, to service, and the Duke of Edinburgh had shown us over many years what this looks like. But perhaps most striking of all today is the sheer wealth of reminiscence from ordinary people in Scotland. It was a reminder of just how many people whose lives he engaged with over the years, and that in itself speaks volumes, I think, with the relationship that the royal family in general has tried to build with Scotland, going right back to that decision in 1947 to grant him the dukedom of the capital city of Scotland. He was, after all, the Duke of Edinburgh. One example of that, of course, is the 7 decades he spent as Chancellor of the University of Edinburgh. The principal today saying that he was far more than a titular Chancellor, far more than simply a name on the stationery, that he engaged energetically and actively and knowledgeably with the lives of the students collectively and individually, and with the cutting-edge research projects, particularly in science and technology. One last such reminiscence, if I may, Huw. I learned today that when the Queen came here in 2017 to open the new suspension bridge across the Firth of Forth, and the Duke of Edinburgh accompanied her, the engineer who was detailed to show him around was told in advance, whatever you do, don't walk slowly and don't talk to him as though he's an old man. And he was 95 at the time.
Alan, thank you very much again. Alan Little there for us, our special correspondent at Holyrood. Let's move from Scotland to Northern Ireland, talk to our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy, who's at Hillsborough. Would you say that the response there has been pretty unified? Emma, what's your sense of it?
Well, the news today has temporarily subdued the tensions that we've seen in Northern Ireland after several nights of violent scenes here. However, there were a number of loyalist protests that were planned for this evening. They were then called off as a mark of respect. But saying that, Huw, we have just in the past hour seen some scenes of street disorder still breaking out in Belfast. But people here have been remembering too the way that Prince Philip had continued to visit Northern Ireland, even during the difficult days of the Troubles, and it was brought very close to home for him when his own uncle, Lord Mountbatten, was murdered by the IRA. A bomb was detonated in his boat off the coast of Mullaghmore in Ireland in 1979, and it was significant today that among the tributes paid to Prince Philip here was Michelle O'Neill, the deputy leader of Sinn Féin. Of course, the Republican Party, once best known as the political wing of the IRA. But of course, Prince Philip visited Northern Ireland many times, in much happier times too. He and the Queen were taken on a special train to visit many parts of Northern Ireland on her coronation tour, and he continued to visit Northern Ireland more than 50 times over 7 decades.
Emma, thank you again for those thoughts there at Hillsborough. Emma Vardy, our Ireland correspondent. Let's go to Cardiff Castle, in the heart of the Welsh capital. Sian Lloyd is there for us. And again, Sian, it's worth pointing out the Duke's links with Wales, not least as Colonel of the Welsh Guards for many years, but other links as well.
Yes, Huw, and people from across Wales have been paying their tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh today, and there will be a death gun salute fired here from Cardiff Castle tomorrow. The Duke of Edinburgh visited Wales, of course, many times over the years, usually accompanying the Queen, but it will perhaps be a visit that he made in the immediate aftermath of the Aberfan disaster in 1966 that people will be particularly remembering here today. 116 children and 28 adults lost their lives when Pantglas School was engulfed by coal slurry. And the Duke of Edinburgh met grieving families. He also spoke to the rescuers, and he was a great comfort to many. He returned there a week later with the Queen, and the couple returned to Aberfan a number of times over the years. The Duke of Edinburgh did have a lasting relationship with Wales and its people, and he had a keen interest in Welsh life, serving as Chancellor of the University of Wales and attending the opening of the Senedd, where tributes will be paid on Monday.
Sian, many thanks again. Sian Lloyd for us there, our correspondent in Cardiff today. Well, there's no question that one of Prince Philip's greatest contributions to public life, some would say the greatest, was the scheme that he established in 1956, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. At the time, the scheme was seen as somewhat radical and pioneering, encouraging young people to explore new challenges, to take risks and to show their own initiative. And as our correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports, the scheme has enriched the lives of millions of young people, even during this pandemic.
The Duke of Edinburgh's Award. Activities, expeditions and adventures. For millions of people, it has been part of growing up. It aims to give young people from all backgrounds a sense of achievement outside of the classroom through field trips and volunteering.
How many times do you think you got lost?
For these pupils at secondary school in the heart of Manchester, the experience has been life-changing.
Like when you go on Duke of Edinburgh, it's just a whole different environment. It's like green everywhere, like as far as you can see.
Even signing up for it was a bit out of my comfort zone, because prior to it I was quite shy and reserved and didn't really talk to many people in my year.
I've been working for a charity shop in my community, and I think definitely it's been a very interesting. You get to meet lots of new people, get to talk to lots of interesting people, hear their story.
Had fun and made so many friends without, I don't know how I'd have gotten through my high school years, honestly. It's really, really good.
It began in 1956 and grew out of the Duke's own experiences at Gordonston. The award's ethos was rooted in the philosophy of the school's headmaster, Kurt Hahn, who felt that education should be about more than just academic achievement.
It was based on Hahn's theory that you shouldn't be a specialist in any one thing, and he felt that you shouldn't concentrate entirely on academic education. His philosophy was that if you could get young people to succeed in any area of activity, that mere sensation of success would spread over into a lot of others.
When the scheme first started, it was considered quite revolutionary, but it also had its detractors.
I think a lot of organisations thought it was going to be a rival. The Scouts, the Guides, Outward Bound Trust, all kinds of people thought, oh dear, here comes another youth organisation to rival us. The cleverness was that it was a programme which was complementary and not competitive, so anyone could do it.
The programme has moved with the times. It started as a boys-only group, and even when girls joined, there was a gender divide.
Can you tell me how you'll be able to get instructors and adjudicators to teach things like marriage and makeup and all the other new schemes you've mentioned in the pamphlet?
Oh, makeup we've got no problem. Marriage might be a bit more difficult.
From helping at food banks to vaccination centres, during the pandemic, many young people have volunteered through the scheme.
Are you here for the vaccine, madam? All right. I think the Duke of Edinburgh is fantastic to gain, especially independence. Everyone can do it. Everyone's helping the community. Everyone's being active. Everyone's learning a new skill. And I think the inclusion of the youth is fantastic.
OK, guys, ready to go?
Throughout the decades, the awards have been based on physical activity, skills, service and expedition. What you choose to do in each category is almost unlimited. Then there are 3 levels: gold, silver and bronze.
It's his vision and energy that created the organisation that enabled many, many young people to be able to access these development opportunities. And he was an absolute sort of stalwart champion for young people's sort of opportunities and development right the way through until he retired. While this is and it's an incredibly sort of sad moment to reflect on his passing, we are incredibly optimistic about the fact that we can build on his incredible legacy, and the award will still be going strong many, many years from now.
Its popularity and success has spread across the globe, with more than 140 countries taking part. The scheme that bears his name will perhaps be his greatest legacy, a testament to the ideas and outlook of the Duke of Edinburgh.
That was Elaine Dunkley there with the story of the hugely successful Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. It's time to have a final word with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. Can I start, Nick, by asking about the days ahead and the kind of decisions that will have to be made in the palace and within government indeed?
Many of these details, of course, have been already worked out. They will be made public tomorrow, but I think we can say that 2 things are certain. Events will be focused very much on Windsor, on St George's Chapel, and I think that we will find a funeral will take place in, well, I would imagine about a week from now. I think the other thing of which we can be absolutely certain is that there will be no fuss. That is precisely as the Duke would have wanted, and I would imagine probably as he has directed himself, and of course which is also right and necessary within all the COVID requirements. And the palace, the Queen will be absolutely determined and insistent that all those requirements are fully met and that the funeral is fully compliant. And between now and then, from this nation and from the wider world, tributes will continue to be paid to this restless outsider, as he was once described, who made such a contribution in support of the British monarch and the British monarchy.
We've talked a lot in the last hour about character, about contribution, about sense of service and duty. How will history judge this man?
He once said of himself, in a sort of moment of disparaging modesty, he described himself as a discredited Balkan prince of no particular merit. Now, his background was royal. He was from European royalty, like the Queen. He's a great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria, a prince of Greece, though he had no Greek blood in him. It was mostly Danish and a bit of German and Russian and British blood. And yet he came to be one of the most influential outsiders to marry into the House of Windsor. He had a sharp mind and a sharp tongue. He didn't suffer fools. He could be abrasive and arrogant. There was a sense of danger about him, someone once said. But of course, as we've been saying, the Queen was absolutely devoted to him. There were bumpy years back in the 1950s. He had no constitutional role. He struggled to find a role. He found himself battling against the very cautious courtiers of Buckingham Palace in the 1950s. But he did find a role for himself. He carved out particular issues and interests of his own, but his principal role always was in support of his wife, the Queen. And I think when finally the reign of this monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, does finally come to an end, and we assess what I think will be regarded as one of the most remarkable reigns in the long history of the British monarchy, the name of Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, will be given great credit for the contribution that he made to the success and the stability of this reign.
Nick, once again tonight, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent, with his thoughts. In a moment, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. after which Clive Myrie will be here to have a look at the morning papers. On BBC Two now, it's Newsnight with Kirsty. But we will close tonight with some of the lasting images, reminding everyone of the life and times of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. From all of us, good night.